Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this collective action against financial crimes event hosted by B20 South Africa at B20 South Africa, powered, of course, by the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa. My name is Bongani Bingwa. I've been already identified twice today. Somebody thought I'm at Clicks. Apparently, I have a twin there. Somebody else thought that we had worked on something else entirely. No. I won't take those honors. In my normal day job, I am the host of 702 Breakfast. I've got a face for radio, which is why perhaps you might think you have seen me somewhere. It is my great pleasure to be your host today. I'm going to be your moderator and MC. Now, I'm a man over 50, which means I have now earned my right to tell dad jokes wherever I go, and you will please laugh along as I tell you one or two stories that don't quite make my children chuckle. The other day I was telling them, so I've got two dogs. I've got a Pekingese and I've got a Yorkie. Any dog people here? So I talk to my dogs, and if you're a dog person, this is something you end up doing, especially on long walks. I asked my dogs just the other day, 2 minus 2. They said nothing. Thank you. Very kind of you to laugh. Thank you, thank you. I mean, just this weekend, I met a Xhosa vegetarian from Ofimvab. Does anyone know Ofimvab? I'd never met her before. All right, none of that nonsense. Today we aim to have a critical dialogue, and it really is a platform ahead of the G20 summit here in Johannesburg. Do you know we've got, I think, 17 days or something like that before the world descends on our beautiful city. Leaders from leading economies coming together to map the road forward in what I think is an increasingly uncertain and fractured world. So in a similar sense today, we have brought together business, government, law enforcement, civil society to really tackle the problem, the threats presented by the illicit economy and illicit financial flows in South Africa, but also globally. So in that regard then, today's discussions aim to be much more than just talk, but to really offer impactful ideas that can reverse the damage that is being done and caused to our nation and people every single day. Without any further ado, we're going to get straight into it. I'm from the Eastern Cape originally, a part of the world or part of the country called Transkei, a former Bantustan. You may remember there were a couple of others, the so-called TBVC states. Was anyone around in those years? There was an old joke because there was an immense rivalry between the people of the Transkei and the people of the Ciskei, obviously separated by the mighty Kai River. And the joke was, and remember the context of the time, Transkei was the first Bantustan to gain its so-called independence. And so the joke was always that the leaders of Ciskei pursued the same action because if Transkei did it, why can't I did it? And I think that's the point about particularly the open display of goods that flow out of the illicit economy. If it's done in broad daylight, then people will begin to ask themselves, if they did it, why can't I did it? And I think part of what we seek today is to say we need to change the picture of public morality, because of course that is a very key pillar of the legitimacy of upholding the rule of law. You've set the scene for us, Zinhle, but to add to your words, let's have a look at the following video about the illicit economy and where we are today.
Every year, between 2 and 5% of global GDP vanishes into illicit financial flows. Trillions siphoned from economies and citizens alike. In Africa, the cost is stark. Around 88 billion US dollars disappear each year, nearly 4% of the continent's GDP. South Africa alone loses more than 100 billion rand annually to illicit trade and financial outflows.
The Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade released its latest report revealing a thriving illicit economy in South Africa, which is costing the real economy billions of dollars. It's so deeply rooted that it's not only costing out desperately needed revenues, but also killing the most vulnerable.
Which illicit trade is robbing us as a nation and an economy.
A strategic review of South Africa's fight against illicit trade paints a grim picture due to illegal activities spanning various sectors, including tobacco, alcohol, pharmaceuticals, as well as wildlife trafficking.
The same forces that drive globalization, open borders, complex supply chains, and digitalization have also empowered illicit finance. Across continents, criminal networks exploit trade routes, fake invoices, and smuggling channels to move money, minerals, and people. From drugs and arms to wildlife and gold, illicit profits are laundered and transferred abroad through sophisticated systems. Today, technology has multiplied the reach. Virtual assets and decentralized finance bypass traditional safeguards. Generative AI produces fake identities and scams at scale. Underground systems, hawala networks, bulk cash, mirror trades erase financial trails.
And what these underground banks do is they transfer money according to something that's called mirror transfer. A person, let's say, on the one end of the network will arrive with a sack full of money in cash, deposit it at the underground bank, and then through this mirror transfer, another person will pick up the same amount of money from the other branch of the same underground banking network. The crucial thing about this is that no money has actually been transferred. It's completely invisible to the authorities that might wish to crack down on it. This illicit money finances all kinds of things. It finances shopping sprees by Chinese consumers who want to buy luxury in Europe. It also finances, we have evidence, the international drugs trade, and is particularly germane when we think of the big crisis of fentanyl that's currently affecting the United States.
In South Africa, these methods fuel high-value crimes tied to gold and cigarettes, draining billions. The illegal cigarette trade alone costs the fiscus about 28 billion rand a year. That's 100 million rand lost every working day. Weak enforcement and under-resourced agencies allow these flows to persist. Many African states lack the tools for real-time data sharing or coordinated investigations. E-commerce platforms often operate without clear seller verification, letting counterfeit and harmful products flood informal markets. South Africa has advanced reforms under the Financial Action Task Force's 22-point plan, but prosecutions for money laundering and corruption still lag behind. Illicit flows don't just steal from the treasury, they steal from people. Countries with high illicit outflows spend a quarter less on health and over half less on education. That means fewer hospitals, fewer classrooms, and slower progress toward the Sustainable Development Goals. As debt rises and trust declines, ordinary citizens pay the price. Yet technology also offers hope. AI-powered analytics can trace hidden networks. Behavioral biometrics can flag suspicious transactions in real time. A global United Nations tax convention could harmonize standards, strengthen asset recovery, and close loopholes across borders. Nationally, the path forward lies in interagency coordination, data transparency, and specialized skills development. Fighting illicit trade is not just about compliance. It's about reclaiming the resources that power development. If governments, financial institutions, and the private sector unite behind technology-driven enforcement and shared accountability, Africa can recover billions in lost revenue. The continent's future depends on our ability to follow the money and make every cent count.
All All right, folks, with that scene set, I think we can take a few things from that video in terms of the chief culprits of this illicit economy, everything from organized crime to money laundering. We, of course, can also think about newcomers such as cybercrime. And I suppose our first discussion really has to ask the question, what are the vulnerabilities, the loopholes, if you will, that allow the illicit economy to flourish? Is it regulatory loopholes? Is it enforcement gaps? Here's a statistic for you. The size of the global illicit economy is estimated to be somewhere between 2 and 5% of global GDP, an estimated 3 to 5 trillion US dollars. That is what is at stake here. And so what we're going to do now is I'm going to invite my first panelists to join me on stage. Please have a seat in the order in which I'm going to be calling you to come on stage and participate. Firstly, let me invite Jared West from Spur and Fisher, who's going to be looking at intellectual property and regulatory law. Jared. Karabo Rajuili from Corruption Watch, representing civil society and anti-corruption advocacy. Thank you, Karabo. Lenore Oosthuizen, FTI, Forensic Investigations and Compliance. Thank you, Lenore. And finally, Michelle Francis Padeachi, GS1 South Africa, looking at the integrity of supply chains. These are my panelists. Thank you. So I have deliberately not read, and I will not do so for the rest of the day, the CVs of all the panelists that are here on stage. Many of them will already be familiar to you, but I think it was the former president, Kgalema Motlanthe, who once threatened to no longer give keynotes anywhere, if only to escape hearing his obituary read in his presence. And isn't that what it feels like when somebody reads your bio in front of an audience? All right, so I'm going to invite each of you to make opening remarks in the context that has already been set out, bearing in mind that video. And I suppose there are a couple of things I want to place in your minds as panelists as we start. The idea that, for example, globalization was meant to turn us into a little village. But of course, the criminals and their networks were watching. Michelle, I'm going to ask you to lead our discussions just in terms of even supply chain integrity, because for all we can say about the illicit economy, they know how to get their goods where they are needed.
Thank you, and good morning to the MC and the delegation here today. You know, as a global standards and supply chain professional, I think it is so important that as GS1 South Africa, that's part of the Consumer Goods Council as well, is when our economy is failing to identify legitimate products that should be safely consumed by our children, by our families, by the citizens of our nation, and be identified properly within our supply chains. And when we fail as a country and as manufacturers and retailers to take hold of new ways of identifying products through legitimate audit trail so that SAPs can come in, that's where it's starting. We have failed as a country to adopt international standards, and I want to stand out with this as an industrial policy instrument to make sure that when you pick up that bottle of water, you know where it comes from. Why? Just like your identity number can be verified by the Home Affairs. Why are we not coming to GS1 South Africa to make sure that barcode number that sits on products, every time you scan it via your phone, goes back to our big, beautiful registry and says, hey, this is legitimate, this is not legitimate. So I want to make that statement that if we can firmly position better supply chain track and trace through logistics, through supply chain, through shops, online, from a farm to a mine, we will make a dent in this complex problem that we need to solve. But it really starts with their data, transforming it so that it's a powerful weapon against the illicit economy. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Michelle. Lenore, let me bring you into the conversation. One of the things that jumped out for me in that video was this idea of real-time investigative capacity and coordination, and how that can lack from country to country as just one of the problems. No doubt you've got your own views.
Yes, definitely. I mean, if you just take into consideration the amount of players that there is in a global supply chain, how many parties actually touches goods once it moves from country A to country B, it is numerous. You don't only have your importers and your exporters and your receiving parties. You have all the intermediaries that actually facilitate the movement of those goods. You have your clearing agents, your freight forwarders, your actual shippers, your transporters, and all of those players has a vital role to play within the entire supply chain. And if the flow of information is siloed into only one or two parties having actual knowledge of what these goods are that's being transported, you can't ensure a secured supply chain throughout the entire chain. I also thought about customs and excise and imports and exports as that was originally my area of expertise, and how is it that I find myself in investigating illicit flows. And I think that is also to the large gaps that has been identified in the presentation, and I'm sure that all the speakers will speak to, is there's a lack of knowledge and knowledge transfers between your experts in certain fields. For instance, when I still walked in on the lighter side of things, I was involved in consulting clients as to how to best structure their supply chain to remain compliant with all the relevant legislations. When I got involved in the investment of the illicit flow part, I soon discovered that the knowledge that you necessarily need for customs and excise and cross-border movement isn't necessarily the knowledge that sits with your banks and our financial institutions. They are there to facilitate the flow of money. And there is no
cross-pollination or very little between these two industries, which in the end is the underlying denominator of the movement of goods and money.
Let's talk about the role of Corruption Watch. Karabo, we often know that in this kind of space there's a lot of advocacy work being done, particularly against what governments might do or not do. But the whole issue of any anti-corruption advocacy is so much broader than that. Your initial comments.
Thank you, Bongani. Absolutely. So Corruption Watch, I'm sure, is well known to most of you in the room. But just a quick introduction, so we're an advocacy activist organization, really at the forefront of trying to tackle corruption from a civil society community perspective. I would agree with you quite simply. I think we know that corruption is not a solitary crime. It needs the one who commits the crime and one who enables that crime to happen. Whilst a lot of our work is directed at the public sector, because government does have a responsibility in terms of regulation and enforcement, what we see in South Africa, but what we see globally as well, is the important role of what's known as the enablers. And so the accountants, the lawyers, the businesses who either turn a blind eye, knowingly or unknowingly, to facilitate corruption or find themselves caught in a web of corruption. So in order to tackle this crime, which is not a victimless crime, and we've seen the numbers in terms of the scale of illicit financial flows, it requires both engagement as well as action from the public sector, from the private sector, from civil society, from academia. That's the only way that this network problem, which is corruption, is truly going to be tackled. Otherwise, we're simply going to be going around the same wheel of only addressing one aspect of what causes corruption fundamentally.
Jared, central, of course, to all of this is the threat to intellectual property, particularly when you think about counterfeiting. No doubt you've got views on that. Your opening remarks.
Listen, counterfeiting is an absolutely global issue. In South Africa, massive. The fight is difficult. The guys we do catch tend to be the lower people on the food chain. There's people that you never get to know of, you don't know the names, you don't know where the money is going, but it's time to start following the money. I know there was one specific slide in the video that spoke about following the money and going up the chain, and that is crucially important. How that is going to get done and how it's going to be done effectively, very difficult. But just raiding and raiding day in and day out is going to serve no purpose. We need to close down the kingpins, follow the money out of this country, and stop it there. If we can get corruption slowed down in South Africa, we'll never stop it completely, but if we can slow it down at the borders, get more containers stopped before it gets into the market, that will be a big leap in the right direction. But our legislation is also stifling enforcement efforts and making corruption more possible. So I think there's certainly a gap to, at the very least, change some of our legislation, although that is a slow process also.
I think if we're talking about the illicit economy in 2025, we have to have a conversation about how technology is a big driver of these types of crimes, and obviously to keep the eyes of the authorities away. Who wants to take a stab at that one, the role of technology in driving the illicit economy?
I'll
Go ahead, Jared.
If you don't mind. So this is technology. I don't think social media can be coined as technology anymore, but it has really opened up tremendous channels, really going straight from supply into the consumer's house. And the anonymity behind social media, you can create a Gmail account, which is fake, and open a Facebook account, put things on Marketplace, ship it without it ever touching your hands, get it to the consumer, and you take your cut and you pay your supplier. It's a very simple process. And you'll never get caught, and you'll never even keep stock. So even if you do get caught, you're not going to lose any money. So just social media in general, WhatsApp groups, Instagram, lately TikTok has flourished for counterfeiting. It's crazy. Then the way that money is being transferred electronically, Bitcoin, it's making it impossible to follow the money, as I suggested initially. And then there's money drop facilities that enables criminals to take cash, get it into the cloud, and the money disappears overseas. And our government certainly doesn't know about it. SARS doesn't know about it. They lose out on all of that potential income. And just very basic technology, things like CCTV cameras being placed on buildings in Johannesburg. The crooks know that we are coming with the police to do a raid when we are 10 kilometers away. And they have their connections, and by the time you get there, all the stock is moved, shops are closed down behind safe doors, and that in itself makes enforcement so much more difficult. So even just rudimentary technology is making the fight against counterfeiting so much more difficult.
No doubt, no, you've also got a perspective of this, because being able to track where the money goes and how it flows is not as easy as it sounds because of technology and the use of it.
No, that's absolutely correct. And Jared made a very valid point in the new methods of payment that is not only set in your traditional banking transactions as we used to know it 5, 10, or maybe 20 years ago. One of the big challenges that we picked up in looking at how the money flows through bank accounts, for instance, is that the entire premises of trade transactions being conducted through trade finance and through your corporate investment sections of banks is no longer the case. About 80% of trade transactions is done through open accounts. That is through your business bank, through people that aren't necessarily expertise in looking at trade documents, being able to verify whether these documents that they've received and the payments that they are making is actually valid. They have no way to validate the documents that's been provided. The other thing is also with customs and excise and imports and outflows is we also as a country and as a world need to evolve to meet those requirements. You can't be stagnant in your procedures. So customs is always a moving target. There's new movement regimes being implemented to facilitate business. But not all the other sectors who are then touched by these movements are necessarily updated or up to date with what does this exactly entail. And this is one of the cracks where so many things fall apart, and that is abused by criminal networks. The other thing is that criminal networks in itself aren't your only over or under invoicers or those who you're going to open a container and nothing's going to be inside. These networks are run like businesses. They generate invoices that are legitimate, and most of the time it is legitimate transactions that goes through. What you have to ask yourself is, where does the money that is sponsoring this transaction, where does that come from, and what is the ultimate goal? Where does that money end up? It's not only smuggling and all your normal red flags that goes on. It has evolved into such a space that you need business strategy to look behind and then find the syndicates and the people behind that.
Because, Michelle, it's easy, as I'm listening to the no now, it's easy as a layperson to think, hang on, we're looking for those empty containers, right, or counterfeit goods in the empty containers because, we've got physical assets being moved around in terms of supply chains. But it's a lot more complex than that, isn't it?
Absolutely, Bongani. And I wanted to say, if you think about the King 5 that's just been released, it adds 12 with a pivot just before the corporate, the Company Act is released. And it said that ethical governance today is impossible with responsible stewardship of data, technology, and information. And the fight against illicit trade, that means harnessing data as a byproduct against crimes. What that means for many of these systems that we are implementing, cryptocurrencies, logistical movements, is that we don't have verifiable audit trails, and we are not locking that in. The criminal bad actors will continue to fight because what we do with our systems across the globe, we seed in proprietary identification. So what you've just said, we can't then forensically track these because a bank issues it an entity for me and for you, and they're two different. But if we start looking and being smarter than the criminals with, the mic is not working, my CEO is trying to get my attention, is if we start fighting differently against the bad actors in using technology, but coming up with innovative, smarter ways to actually link economies, borders better, then we can really win this game. And I just want to give you one example. We are working with the Democratic Republic of Congo. That copper that's in your phones, the court case that went to the EU, and they are losing credibility because of illicit flows of rare earth that goes to smelters, and they can't be paid for it, robbing that economy and the artisanal miners from valuable livelihood. What is that government doing now? They are putting in a platform that is underpinned by a global framework of identification, not proprietary. And they're going to win this war, I believe, in that country because they are shifting and they're going to become smarter than the best technology players in the world because they see what they need to do. And that's what we need to do as a country, is shift how we think about digital technology to empower this economy. And I really firmly believe that that's what our government, our DTIC and SABS and SANAs and the accreditation teams needs to do in our country.
You talk about being smarter than these bad actors, but can any single government honestly do it alone? I mean, these networks are globalized, they're sophisticated, they're borderless. And what often happens, you used the example of rare earth minerals, with so much competition between state actors supporting their own economies and their own companies. The coordination that needs to be there sometimes isn't, and so governments then tend to be reactive. Karabo?
Yes, but I think there's examples of what it takes to have collective action when it comes to tackling financial crime. and these kinds of illicit activities. I think what we see from civil society is ability to really innovate in small ways, which represents what can happen at scale. So with Corruption Watch, for example, Corruption Watch receives reports since its inception, and in the first 10 years of Corruption Watch's existence, we received over 36,000 reports from the public around incidences of small-scale corruption. Now, this is important for a number of reasons. I think, one, it shows that there's actual will and momentum within the public to say something is wrong, and so having those collective eyes on the problem in society. And I really like to point that Zintle made about members of the Consumer Goods Council who also report on instances of counterfeiting and goods. We really see where there's an enabling environment to get reports and information about where the gaps are, where the risks are, where the corruption is happening. That can really be a source of data and information to allow the kinds of investigations and enforcement to be well targeted. The second thing is, again, thinking about data, is having tools where the public can really be able to point themselves in direction where they feel they can report. And so a tool that Corruption Watch launched in 2021 is called the VESA tool, which was focused on police corruption, which is a very topical issue for South Africans with the Madlanga Commission and the parliamentary inquiries. And that was meant to really assist the public to be able to be those eyes and ears, to be able to report on what's happening from their perspective, again, giving the data and insights which really help law enforcement, government, the private sector, and others to act. But I think really critical to this is ensuring that those who do report feel safe and enabled to report. Because as much as you can have the right platform, the right mechanism, the right tools, without that safeguarding around who reports and how they report, and them not being victimized or face risk as a result of it, is fundamental to this as well.
I think that's a fantastic example at a micro level in terms of ordinary members of the public. But in a sense, having set then the scene of how bad the problem, where's the low-hanging fruit in terms of collective action, in terms of, changing regulations? Where's the low-hanging fruit? Where do we start? Because we can get, I suppose, that whole paralysis of analysis and think, oh my gosh, this is just too much and it's too overwhelming, and these guys are ahead of us every step of the way. But where is the low-hanging fruit? Where are the opportunities to make sure we can make a dent in this, Jared?
For me, amending legislation. So South Africa's legislation enforcing against counterfeit goods specifically is very onerous on the brand holders. The amount of money that they have to spend to enforce against goods that they don't want in the market in the first place, that they are actively trying to get out of the market, storage costs, destruction charges, all of those things should move away from the brand holder. It is so in many European countries, it's so in America. In Europe, they have a simplified process. The goods are confirmed counterfeit, it will be destroyed. In South Africa, again, very onerous. There's court proceedings, civil litigation, criminal litigation, should you so wish. And for me, let's get the goods off the market as cheaply as possible without the brands incurring money so that they can spend more money enforcing against proper targets as opposed to small, air freight, cargo at the airports and so on. We want to go after the containerized cargo. So for me, amending the Counterfeit Goods Act, it's something that should have been done many, many years ago. It's a 1997 piece of legislation.
Think of specific amendments?
Well, without sounding legalese, Section 7 and Section 9 forces the complainant or the brand holder to take certain legal steps. Should they not take those legal steps, the goods are released to the suspect. That should be abolished. Why do that? If it's been confirmed counterfeit, it must be destroyed, irrespective of the legal proceedings that follow afterwards. And then a simplified process. So that takes Section 7 and Section 9 away. We have good, if you get convicted, you can get a fine of up to 5,000 Rand per item. Enforce the legislation. When somebody gets convicted, give a fine of 5,000 Rand an item. It shouldn't be a slap on the wrist. Too often we see the National Prosecuting Authority being comfortable with a plea of guilty, and then a suspended fine of 20,000 Rand or 30,000 Rand. That serves no purpose. It's not going to cause the next person in line who reads that in the newspaper to say, goodness, maybe I should not sell counterfeit goods. Really go after the criminals, and when you catch them and you get them convicted, give them harsh penalties, because the legislation is there. Enforce the legislation. And then, listen, I think one of the other very low-hanging fruits is a collective, multidisciplinary enforcement body. I know we've got the BMA, and it kind of puts a couple of government bodies together, but we need the enforcement body. So there's currently the illicit and counterfeit goods unit of the South African Police Service that's doing a fantastic job, but they should incorporate people from immigration, customs and excise, SARS. They must all be involved under one banner and be dedicated. There's no purpose to have a team, but half the team is doing something else, working on other crimes. If we are really serious about fighting financial crimes, counterfeiting, illicit, have a dedicated team, and that is all that they are doing. And that is what they can focus on without being drawn into different directions all the time.
All right, Karabo, at a macro level, more low-hanging fruit?
Macro level, whistleblower protections. And
Yes.
so in South Africa, we've got the current Protection of Disclosure Act, which is in place right now. But what we know in South Africa, globally in the region, is that whistleblowers are under fire. They get killed for their courageous acts. They face victimization. They face huge financial losses and personal losses. We know this, yet it's so critical in terms of being able to point out both the systemic as well as specific wrongdoings, but also it's a core part of enforcement of our laws, as well as as well as really shaping societal norms. So we've done some work to think about what does a good framework which really empowers whistleblowers with the right kind of safeguards to be able to speak up. And looking at the current PDA versus what's in draft and under the parliamentary process through what's going to be known as the Whistleblower Act, there's a number of good things with this now, amendments to the Whistleblower Act, including thinking about having universal reporting, so it's not just a matter of you working in a company and working in a government institution being protected, but if you happen to engage with that particular government entity, those protections will be extended to you. Crucially, now having some kind of framework around criminal sanction around victimization in this draft legislation, as well as really making sure that the law itself reflects the intent and the spirit of our constitutional framework. However, there are big gaps in this draft legislation, which is currently under drafting. The first is that it doesn't place any kind of powers to investigate once a report has been issued, which means that a report can simply be ignored and never acted upon, which is a huge gap. The next gap, which I think is very pertinent for many of you in the room, is that it doesn't place any obligatory requirements on the private sector. And so it doesn't require there to be some kind of policy for companies to enable whistleblowers to be able to report without victimization, and doesn't have any require any kind of ethics champion within the private sector. And this is critical because I go back to the opening remarks around there is goodwill in the room to be able to say when there is wrongdoing or where there is illicit behavior, a desire to report. Those safeguards need to be there both for the public sector as well as the private sector. So this is a significant gap. The last gap is the time frames around when and how investigations of whistleblowing are undertaken. And so now it can drag on for years, even decades in terms of investigations. This is simply too long for a whistleblower whose life might be put on pause for years, even decades, and ensuring that that regulatory framework is robust enough to really protect the critical role that whistleblowers play in society.
Yeah, the tragedy, as someone who's spoken to many a whistleblower, is that, as you say, their lives are on hold, but the networks behind this continue their merry lives and its business as usual. More low-hanging fruit, Lenore?
I actually want to also agree with that. I mean, from an investigative perspective, if the silos of information that's held by the different regulators that's looking after certain sections of the economy can be broken down, a more proactive response to criminal activity can be followed, rather than the reactive part of investigating criminality afterwards or illicit trade. You mentioned the DRC and the precious minerals that's being that will possibly be illicitly extracted from those economies. So we in South Africa have the same scenario with the gold mafia and some gold that's left our country in sponsoring illicit activities. If you look and you investigate that type of scenario afterwards, and you are finally in a position to connect all the dots and gain all the information from the different departments, from SARS, that's actually the gatekeeper of the borders, your banks that look after the flow of money, and then your minerals council that's supposed to look after your mineral, you discover that the information was actually always there. All those transactions has been recorded by SARS as per legislation. The inflow and outflow of goods in this country is all recorded. The banks are sitting with their information as to the funds that are received and as and when and why and what they were received for. And then your Minerals Council sits with registers of all the gold that was supposedly exported by the players in this entire supply chain. So basically you had all the information, it was just sitting in different silos. So in order to have a more reactive response, if we can connect those silos and make the exchange of information between departments an automatic requirement rather than afterwards let me go and request what you have to consolidate it with the information that I now have, you can follow a reactive response. You can immediately see there's a spike in the amount of a certain mineral or goods that's either flooding the market or flowing out of the market.
Could we use technology
Of course.
as a way to preempt all of that without a human hand having to see
And that's the
red flags?
That's the ideal. I mean, in some of our investigations, one of the things that we had to point out to some of the financial institutions is if you have knowledge about how the SARS EDI system works, you will know that document A and B cannot be different from each other because the one is generated from the other one. But that knowledge isn't shared with the other gatekeepers, the financial gatekeepers, that actually look at those documents to verify. And I think at the moment, we've never been in a better technological space to innovate. I mean, AI was on the peripheral of our all's conversations 2 or 3 years back. Now, if you're not using it, you're seeing as lacking. Why can't we start using all this technology to our advantage? And then the last leg that I just wanted to address is also the export of goods out of this country and the final destination of where it ends up. Of course, exports always causes the inflow of money, which for our economy is good, but is it really good money that's coming in? Is the goods that are being exported really being validated, or that goods that necessarily has to be sent out? And where does that end up? In this gold scenario, connecting your different jurisdictions for where the gold ended up and where it ultimately ended up. You can follow that entire supply chain. And often a cross-border trade is used specifically for the reason that it is so disconnected. So if you're running a criminal enterprise and you want to break an audit trail, there is so many places in that supply chain that the audit trail can get broken, or the two jurisdictions doesn't speak to each other. So you don't know if the goods that were said to be exported from country A actually ended up in country B. And there a lot of coordination is also required.
All right, Michelle, low-hanging fruit.
So, Ghani, I want to say to the media to keep doing what we're doing today. Because we were on a call on Monday on electrical products that are substandard, that causes homes to burn down, people lose their lives. So if we don't say that this economic crime and illicit trade is a public health and a consumer trust crisis, that's the first thing, is we must have the check a day done campaigns, because the consumer needs to know, how do I check the product is illicit? Where do I go to find that it's illicit? How do I use the My CGCSA app to inform me that's in your hands? Get that app download. So average conversations with the consumer, we have to keep doing that. We need to be more out there, not sitting out in our offices talking to average citizens on what needs to happen. So that's for me the first hanging fruit, because we're not good. Consumers are buying your products that are illicit and cheaper because of poverty. The second thing is using technology. You know, fragmented data, weak visibility are regulatory loopholes. And that's when the bad actors win. We are losing precisely because the big manufacturers of the world, the retailers, are not willing to share critical data with SARS. So how do we bring that public-private partnership? As our CEO always says, we can show so much visibility and have more transparency, because that's the new currency of trust, it's transparency, to win against the bad actors. The low-hanging fruit is to say to the manufacturers, the retailers, the scannable data, share it in a trusted platform, maybe that's SARS, with invoicing, and you scan it and you can quickly check with the technology across customs, across, across borders, then we're going to win. And if we are not activating pilots of customs and trade digitalization and being real about how we do this, how we have integrated systems, bring the best minds of the country, get the funding behind us, we're not going to win. And for me, that's the low-hanging fruit, is get to the citizen, watch, and put data in their hands to know what should they buy, how can they buy, and share your information with a trusted set of platform at a national level, and we can begin to win this game.
Right, let me not hog the conversation entirely. I will open the floor perhaps for one or two questions if one of you have a question for our panelists. I know there'll be media interviews and opportunities later to get a one-on-one conversation, but for the purposes of our gathering now in this discussion, are there any questions from the floor? I think we've got one or two mics roving around. We've got one here. Please be as brief as you can.
Thank you. We're also part of the Consumer Goods Council, the Risk Initiative. In the retail space, there are certain platforms that allow people to transfer money out of South Africa without anything flagging to SARS. Items like Hello Payza, My Money, and those type of things. We get, on a daily basis, people transferring goods out to India, Pakistan, Zimbabwe, wherever the place is. This has been highlighted by us as possible risk. And listening to your conversation, this is definitely a platform that they are used to move the money out of the country. I think that is something that we're trying to report it and say, look at it. It's a banking platform that's supported by a third party, which then enrolls somebody, which is easy to give false documentation and those type of things to go out. So what's your take on that?
Who wants to take it?
Well, I'll start off by saying that your countries of destination that you mentioned, Pakistan, India, probably Bangladesh, speaks volumes. I've done many, many raids, and I promise you we can walk into Hyde Park now and go to any shop selling mobile phone accessories, and they will be selling counterfeit mobile phone accessories, 100%. And those shops will be Pakistani owned, guaranteed. I have not done a single raid in 15 years at a mobile phone accessory shop that was not Pakistani owned. And not a South African Pakistani, a person residing in Pakistan. So the money is flowing out, absolutely. You know, you guys have flagged it. Has anything been done about that? Probably not. And I think that's the risk. We whistleblow, we flag problems, but the next step, the execution and the solution to the problem is where we are lacking. From our side, there's very little we can do because what we have access to through the police channels will be bank records, the lease agreements, those sort of things. This is completely undercover. That money is going out with nobody knowing about it. And there's very little from us as the lawyers with the police that we can do about it. I don't know if maybe
no?
You have...
Yeah, and I also think one of the challenges is that to keep up with the new fintech technology and how it operates and how exactly that gets recorded, and that there always needs to be an eye on those innovations. Some of the innovations might seem innocent in that it facilitates or it it makes the transfer of money much cheaper. But is there really the control that's needed and the different KYC checks that's also required? And then if it is on the cross-border movement of goods, again, if those facilitators can be better linked up with the information held by the likes of SARS, you don't actually need to verify a physical document. You need to hold it up against the light to see if it's a fake or not. That information should be recorded in a cross-border movement, which you should be able to automatically verify. If the entry isn't there, that export didn't exist, or you smuggled it out. And that is what our tax administrator functions on a daily basis. If SARS assesses you and you said no, but you did do the X, Y, and Z, they say come and prove me because according to my records, it didn't happen. Why should criminals be treated any different?
Michelle, I see you're itching.
Yes, I just wanted to say, if SARS could provide that platform of data and a South African policeman picks up a pack or a bottle of liquor that's illicit, and they scan and they check the data that they have and they say this is not recorded, that gives him the right to confiscate those goods, right?
Simple as that.
So, human in the loop. Now, how are you going to empower the environmental health practitioners, SAPs, with a set of trusted data that allows us to simply bring it down to a citizen or the law enforcement to act? Because if we just have a few good cases where the bad actors are caught and it's visible and it's out in the media, certainly, yes, they'll get smarter, but at least that gives visibility and transparency. Hey, we see you, because the data does not lie. That forensically hard audit trail is visible because it's powering trust with data for everybody, everywhere. That's really what we need to do.
Because so much of this activity is hidden, often in plain sight. I think we could carry on, possibly for another 45 minutes, and that's exactly what we're going to do. No.